This video is brought to you by Atlas VPN. Interested in Roman gladiators? You clicked the right video. Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today I've gathered a whole list of gladiators facts that will blow your mind. Let's jump right into it. We are all used to the idea of gladiators being professional combatants fighting in the arena or amphitheater during the Roman period. Now, regardless of how popular it will become with the masses, gladiatorial combat did have a rather ritualistic and we could say humble beginning. Most likely in its original form, gladiatorial combat comes from the Etruscan tradition of worshipping the dead through a combat or struggle, and it was used instead of making human sacrifices. Now, when it comes to ancient Rome, the earliest we can date a gladiatorial fight is as early as 264 BC, and it occurred during the funeral of a Roman senator, Junius Brutus Pera. During this event, 6 warriors in 3 clashes fought to commemorate the late senator. Alright, but if it started as a form to celebrate the dead, so something in conjunction with funerals, how did it become the sort of spectacle and in fact the most popular public pastime for Rome? Well, in order to answer this question properly, we need to dive a little deeper. Even though gladiatorial combat started as a ritualistic celebratory moment to honor the dead, with only the immediate family watching the fight in silence, gladiatorial events will evolve with time. And having dropped the funeral or commemorative purposes, there will be 2 reasons why you would want to hold gladiatorial games: personal advertisement and political mass control. As gladiatorial combat became more and more popular with the masses, organizing the events became a great way to pay tribute not to the dead, but to yourself. Wealthy and powerful individuals started to organize all of these events to please the masses so that they, in return, could gain their favor. So it became a tool in the hands of politicians and powerful people to gain the favor of the masses. Gladiatorial games were also organized to cheer the people, so raise the spirits, particularly during a time of enemy invasions or in general civil war. And they were very effective at it because you could achieve 2 things. You could make people happy, make them entertained, and entertained people tend to be distracted, and at the same time you could reinforce the social order through display of violence which was performed or proclaimed in public by the state. Okay, so this will suffice as an introduction. Let's go to the actual fun questions. Were gladiatorial fights always fought inside amphitheaters, like the famous Flavium Amphitheater, better known as the Colosseum? Initially, gladiatorial combat was fought in either squares or forums that were specifically used for these special occasions. It will be during the late Republic that amphitheaters would be purposely built for gladiatorial combat, with the Colosseum being the biggest one of all, capable of hosting 50,000 people. What were gladiatorial games called in Latin? The word that the ancient Romans used was the Latin word munera in plural form. Let's have a look at the singular and also all the other possible meanings of this word. The singular is munus. Show, gladiator, fountain, votive gift, offered for a funeral, favor, gift, work, product, burden, commitment, obligation, tax, charge, function, obligation, duty, task. What did gladiators eat? We do have quite a bit of information when it comes to the typical diet of a gladiator fighter. Some of this information comes from the very fact that Pliny the Elder calls them with the nickname barley eaters, suggesting that they did eat a lot of barley. Moreover, in 1993, a discovery of the bodies of 22 gladiators who were buried in the western section of Turkey were found and their bodies were analyzed. After the isotope analysis was performed, what we seem to see is that their diet would have been in fact very high in carbohydrate intake. Surprisingly, the amount of meat protein that the gladiators would normally eat seemed to be rather low, although they also did eat a lot of legumes, so at least they got quite a bit of vegetable protein. We also have a mention from Galen, who was a Roman medic who specifically worked at gladiatorial schools in the 2nd century. He mentions the gladiators ate mainly barley, which would seem to confirm Pliny the Elder's nickname, together with some dry fruit. As a little bonus fun fact, it appears that the ancient Romans were fully aware that a diet fully focused on carbohydrates could have led to calcium deficiencies, and that they addressed this with a special concoction or a drink that they would give gladiators, which would have charwood and some bone ash, which were very rich in calcium, in a way an early form of supplementation. Could a gladiator win his freedom? Although it would be rather rare, it is absolutely true that some gladiators did win their freedom, and in general any gladiator, almost, who entered the arena could reach freedom. Now, this freedom could be granted by his owner, by the emperor, but this was easier said than done, as such liberation would normally come after many years of fighting, if you survived. If you've ever heard of the word rudis, which is the wooden gladius, it is also true that that rudis was given to a gladiator who was freed as a symbol of his past career. Now, when it comes to liberation and gladiators, we do have an interesting account of something that happened during the reign of Emperor Trajan or Trajanus. We are told of a gladiator who received freedom because he managed to fight for 9 days in a row, non-stop, no breaks, and still survive and perform exceedingly well. So sometimes if you were very skilled, then you could do stuff that in theory you weren't supposed to, you could gain freedom. Or die. Now, if you have found any of these facts interesting, I have so many more to come, and I will address them after a brief word from a dear sponsor. Now, if you're like me and you like to surf the internet looking for interesting historical information, it's a great idea to do it in safety, which is why you should totally use today's sponsor, Atlas VPN. A VPN is a virtual private network that makes all of your internet traffic travel through an encrypted tunnel, and this way it protects you from spying, public Wi-Fi dangers, it hides your IP address, and online activities. Atlas VPN is a great choice because it was developed by cyber security specialists, and among other things, it gives you access to the Data Breach Monitor, which is a security feature designed to track any data breaches related to your online account, automatically scanning any leaked information. But another add-on through Atlas VPN is the fact that you can use Netflix from any countries, regardless of where you are. So let's say that you wanted to watch a show that is only available in the UK, but you live in America. No problem, just change your country through the VPN and boom, access granted. I always have Atlas VPN active on my machine, so that is because one account lets you use multiple devices. I personally really like Atlas VPN not only because it's a great choice, but also because it's really affordable, and that links to today's special offer. The summer deal for protection, that's $1.79 a month for 3 years plus 4 months for free. So if you've been considering getting a VPN but you weren't sure about the prices, then now is the time. And don't forget to click the link in the description. That's $1.79 a month for 3 years plus 4 months for free. Keep in mind that this is a time-limited offer, so be quick and click the link in the description. And big thanks to Atlas VPN for sponsoring my video. Did some gladiators become famous? Oh, absolutely. In fact, we could say that some of the most famous gladiators reached superstar status, the same as a modern-day athlete. And that would mean that not only they would be very well known throughout the empire, but also women absolutely loved gladiators. So definitely gaining the sympathy of the public had its positive aspects. What was the biggest gladiatorial event ever? The 2nd and 3rd century AD, during the Imperial era, is probably when the gladiatorial combats of the Munera became the most developed. It was under the reign of Trajan that the greatest, the biggest gladiatorial event was held. It lasted 123 days, and it had 10,000 gladiators in it. Were gladiators all slaves? Now, it is true that some gladiators were absolutely slaves, and we could say that the idea of the word gladiator has become almost synonymous to that of slave. But that's not what a gladiator is. Only some gladiators were slaves. That there were 4 types of people that could become gladiators. A slave, a criminal for murder, mutilation, robbery, arson, or lease, a prisoner of war, and a freeman, including soldiers and residents of Rome. Now, the latter is probably the one that might surprise a few of you, like why would anyone do such a thing? But here's the thing, the idea of gladiatorial combat being a lucrative way to make money meant that if you were someone who was pretty strong, pretty good fighter, why not doing it for a few years and then stop? And that's the main difference between a free man becoming a volunteer gladiator and a prisoner of war. A prisoner of war or a slave, they couldn't just stop, and the only way they could reach freedom, as we mentioned, was to have it granted. But for a free man, and occasionally a free woman, who wanted to become a gladiator, then they would sign a contract, and part of what this contract stipulated is that you could stop whenever you wanted. And some people were not only drawn into it for the possible fame and glory, or maybe just to make money, but also to be able to pay their own debts. Oh, and then we have one more. An emperor. I mean, Caligula did want to become a gladiator. He was absolutely fascinated with gladiators. Not something that made him very popular. I mean, at the end of the day, as I was saying, gladiators had a pretty low social ranking, so the idea that an emperor would also want to be a gladiator was kind of weird in the mind of the Romans. but then again, he's the emperor. But even though we know that, of course, these fights where the Emperor Caligula would take part in, they would have been staged. I mean, it's not like the gladiators could really kill him, and oftentimes he would be using real weapons, whereas the gladiators against him were given wooden weapons. Of course, all of this can make us cringe, but then again, think about it. Can you imagine one of our modern politicians right now stepping in an MMA cage and starting to do spinning kicks and throwing people around? I mean, I would respect them for that if they did. Imagine one of our prime ministers pulling that one off. Now, where does the name gladiator come from? Well, the name gladiator, or in Latin gladiator, comes from the word gladius, which is of course the Latin word to mean sword. So basically a gladiator is a swordsman, or a sworder. As a mini note of pronunciation for those who are interested, the word is pronounced gladius. The S at the end is a voiceless alveolar retracted sibilant, and both vowels are short when it comes to phonemic vowel length. If you want to know more, please check out my second channel, all about languages, Metatron's Academy. What was the mortality rate of gladiators? I think a little bit due to the media, Hollywood, video games, people now have this idea that gladiators just died all the time. Every time you have an event, half of the gladiators are dead. Now, even though I have to say that yes, it was an extremely brutal and violent sport, still this idea of such a high rate of mortality is in fact a myth. But how do we know that? Well, first of all, we are told that gladiators had excellent medical care. In fact, we could say that in the hands of both their trainers, politicians, statesmen, senators, the life of a gladiator was more valuable than that of a regular private citizen, unless they were aristocrats. That's because a gladiator is a professional fighter, he's an entertainer, and he's expensive. You need to feed them, you need to train them, it takes years. And so being able to waste all of that every single time there is a combat event would be a really bad way of investing money. Now, don't get me wrong, people did die during gladiatorial events, but the percentages might surprise you. According to George Weil, a new gladiator who entered the arena would have a 10% chance of dying during his early career. Now, even though during the late Roman Empire, already the 4th century, as we were getting towards the end of gladiatorial games as a spectacle, the mortality rate of new gladiators was going up to almost as high as 35%, maybe 45%, but the end of the Roman Empire tended to have an incredibly high mortality rate because the sport had become extremely brutal. And that absolutely does not represent gladiatorial games for the entirety of their existence. Also, this percentage would change if you were really good, in the sense that even though at the beginning you would have a 10% chance of dying, if you could survive that and then you became popular, then the chances of people wanting you to keep on living because you had your own fan base would increase the possibility of being pardoned. Even if you're being defeated, the crowd wants you alive, so the emperor is gonna grant it. So in a way, even though there was a level of mortality, you could increase your odds of surviving by being really good. And to understand how the death of a really good veteran would be financially crippling, all we need to do is to look at Emperor Augustus and his ban of gladiator fights where no quarters was given. The guy literally prohibited them. This of course doesn't mean that no one would die, it could still happen, but the chances were lowered, and they wanted that. What was a gladiator's average age? This is a little bit of a complicated one, as any estimate of sorts would be, but we could say that possibly the gladiator average age would be between 20 and 30-year-old. Although of course this is just an average, so it just doesn't mean that every gladiator would die at age 30. And we are basing this on just career statistics and also tombstones. So it's indicative, not exactly a precise science. But one thing we can learn from these career statistics that we get on tombstones of gladiators is that there is one specifically from Sicily that described a gladiator named Flamma. Now, he died at age 30. He fought 34 fights, he won 21. So that also tells us that even if you didn't win, or even if you were defeated, that didn't automatically mean death. How much did it cost to organize a gladiatorial event? Ooh, get ready for this one. Although it's not easy to bring forth precise estimates, particularly when I need to sort of answer this question relatively briefly, when we have to take into consideration inflation, the fact that the way they were organized changed completely during the Republic, during the Empire, but I can give you a little bit of an estimate to have an idea of the ballpark of how much it would cost. And that's based on the words of Polybius, who lived in the 2nd century BC. He states that organizing the game did not cost less than 30 talents, which would be 750,000 sesterces. But in general, organizing gladiatorial events was so expensive that several people had to go into loans to be able to afford to pay. Unless you were the emperor. Then you just tax people and make them pay. The gladiators actually fight wild animals. That one is also true, and one of the examples we have is from the gladiatorial events that were held in Pompeii in 55 BC, during which the gladiators didn't only fight other combatants, but they also fought wild animals. Plutarch also reports that Gnaeus Pompey became extremely famous because he had the tendency of organizing large-scale gladiatorial events which included wild animals, and those were expensive. And after he became a consul in 55 BC, he even organized one gladiatorial event which included a whole elephant. And once again, Plutarch tells us that up to 500 lions were killed during these gladiatorial games. Just so you understand the price of something like that. A first-class lion could cost a maximum of 150,000 denarii or 600,000 sesterces. So 500 lions in total cost, according to the value of money in the 4th century, considering inflation, would be 300 million sesterces. But then again, if there is one thing the Romans had, was a powerful economy. Did you know that gladiators worked as security guards? So this is something that happened not only during the transition between the Republic and the Empire, but also during all sorts of civil wars. But in general, gladiator fighters who were really good and veterans were sometimes hired, so freed and hired, as personal bodyguards or security guards by rich people, wealthy people and important politicians, which was a very popular practice until it was banned. Who was socially more important, a gladiator or a Roman legionary? The rank of a gladiator, no matter how popular he would be, was always lowest than that of any member of the Roman army, from the tribunes in general or the legati all the way down to common legionaries. There is also one of the reasons why gladiators during their events would never dress up as legionaries and they would never wear full armor. It is interesting to note that female gladiators existed and they are called gladiatrix. We don't exactly know how rare they were and whether they were allowed to fight or not, depending on what emperor and what period, but in general it is true that Roman gladiatrix, or female gladiators, did exist and did fight, and there were some people that were really fond of them. Gladiatrix were banned by Emperor Septimus Severus in 200. For example, Emperor Domitian or Domitianus particularly liked to watch struggles between women in the gladiatorial arena, but Emperor Septimus Severus in 200 AD will ban them forever. Is it true that ancient Romans believed that gladiatorial blood had healing properties? It is true in the sense that yes, some people did believe this, and it is reported that the blood of a gladiator, so basically if there was some blood spilled or maybe someone died, then some of that blood would be sold to some people because they believed not only that it had healing properties, but it could also heal and fix infertility. To what range this was popular and how many people believed it? Difficult to know. Okay, noble ones, well I hope that you enjoyed this video so far. If you did, I can make more because literally there are so many other things to say about gladiators, all of the different classes, for example, the sort of equipment and the actual differences in the sort of helmets they used and weapons. There is so much to say, so if you're interested, let me know in the comments as usual, and don't forget to click the link in the description to make use and take advantage of the amazing offer by Atlas VPN. And as always, thank you very much for watching and supporting the Metatron's channel. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.